let's dive into Intel. Alright, so the way I look at it is I start with the stock price. I look at the number of shares outstanding, which you can find in a few different places. One place to find it is just the 10K. The most recent 10 filing, whether it's a 10K or a 10Q, it's usually on like the first page. The way the SEC loads these things, even a super fast computer like mine, it gets a little messed up, so it's not a great system. Right, usually there's a shares outstanding. Here it is, 4.137 million, so 4,137 million, so 4.137 billion shares outstanding. So market cap's 112 billion, just a fraction of like Nvidia's. It's funny. Nvidia used to be a pimple on Intel's butt. Now they're bigger than Intel. I'll be uploading this model on my GitHub. All my files are available on my GitHub totally for free as a courtesy to all you folks. Alright. So we need to look up their cash and debt. That's going to be on something called the balance sheet, which is one of the 3 financial statements. If you're not familiar with financial statements, you're about to get a world-class introduction. Financial statements are the life of the markets, the language of the markets, the lingua franca. You cannot understand business without understanding financial statements. The 3 financial statements tell basically the complete picture, the whole story of any company. You can encapsulate the entire business in those 3 statements. So we're just going to look through. The 10K is the annual report, so it's very detailed. It's got a lot of just a ton of data, and we're looking for the 3 financial statements. Sometimes it's sequestered in a separate file. Sometimes it isn't. But it won't take too long to find. We can also get some abridged financial statements from the press release. Sometimes they're not abridged at all, sometimes they are. I saw Latinx, I have to stop. Intel Latinx Leadership Council. Of course. Very woke. Alright, here's the income statement. So this the income statement tracks period results. That means for a year or for a quarter or for whatever. The balance sheet is a snapshot statement. It tracks, it tells you the account values at a specific date. So it's like a camera that takes a photo. And this is what we wanted. We want the most updated cash balance of the company, and that is for available each quarter. So the most recent one is available for this quarter, so we can get that added up. Looks like 34 billion, roughly. You gotta include anything that's kind of a liquid instrument, in my opinion. So those 2 and this one look liquid. And now we gotta look at the debt. The debt is 4 billion here and then 37 billion there. And companies use debt for all kinds of reasons, stock buybacks, etc. So that's not necessarily a bad thing or anything. Okay, so those are the big 6. It's 112 billion market cap, 120 billion enterprise value. If you don't know what an enterprise value is, it's a really important concept. If you struggle with that, you're not going to make it very far in investing. Take your time to learn and understand what it is. It's basically the market cap adjusted for the net cash. So kind of what you're paying for the business, if that makes sense. All right, so now let's look at the income income statement. We're looking at Intel, or InSmell if you're a juvenile. Or if you just lost a lot of money on Intel and you're mad. All right, so let's go back to the income statement because it tells the story of the company. And you can see that the revenue, which is the sales of their product, has gone down quite a lot actually. They dropped 20% this year. And they only grew 1% in 2021. So it's pretty interesting. Let's look at gross margin. Gross margin is the cost, basically the revenue after cost of goods sold. So it's kind of what's left after you deduct what it took to make the product you've actually sold. And you could look at it as on a percentage basis. So I'm going to look at that on a percentage basis and see how that tracks. It's kind of hard to eyeball that, you know. Maybe there's some savant out there that can eyeball it, but I can't. So looks like 43%. So as their sales went down, their margin dropped. That's kind of like a concept called deleveraging. Now they have some other expenses. R&D is their major expense. It looks like marketing, selling, and administrative, or marketing general administrative is actually their smaller cost. And that's funny because I was looking at Nvidia and Texas Instruments, and that they all kind of work similarly. These semiconductor companies don't really need to advertise. It's kind of amazing. They just make their chips and they sell, and that's it. You know, there's no big marketing push or anything like that. So they turn out to be pretty profitable companies. Although Intel in this year was not very profitable, at least according to the income statement. We're going to look at the cash flow statement. It might tell a different story. So Intel's costs went up and up even though their revenue went down. In fact, you can see their costs rose dramatically over the last 2-3 years, but their revenue has dropped a bit, so it's a bit strange. But again, this could be a function of just a function of accounting. We're not going to include equity investment gains because that's typically not a recurring item. It's kind of a GAAP, non-GAAP thing. GAAP is generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. And we kind of prefer non-GAAP numbers when possible, although we want to understand the difference between GAAP and non-GAAP. All right, so this is taxes. Again, the non-GAAP concept. We have to basically adjust all this stuff for the fact that GAAP is very imperfect, especially for the investor. GAAP makes a lot of sense from an accounting perspective, but from an investor perspective, we have a lot of adjustments we have to make to kind of try to reflect the steady state of the business. So anyway, those are the last 3 years for Intel. I actually kind of want to look at Nvidia real quick just so you can get a sense for, like, I'm going to put it up here. You get a sense for just how different these two companies are. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So Nvidia's a lot smaller revenue-wise, even though they've got 3 times the market cap. Isn't that funny? All right, let's look. So this is fiscal year ended 23. So this is sort of going to be like full year 2022. So let's put that in 26,923. And then that's 26,914. That's 16,675. Okay, so Nvidia had a monster 2021, while Intel only grew 1%, and then while Nvidia stayed flat, so in a tough environment, Intel dropped 20%. So you can kind of see the ratio of the two closing, the gap closing, because Nvidia seems to be a lot better positioned than Intel on a product side. Intel sort of always ignored the graphics chip market as, oh, that's a small market, but obviously they messed that up pretty bad. All right, let's now kind of look at the cash flow statement. So the cash flow statement basically reconciles the income statement, and it's pretty complicated, unfortunately. But once you understand how the cash flow statement works, you really start to reach the end of financial statement understanding, and you can sort of get to financial statement interpretation, which is a bit different. Just because you understand it doesn't mean you understand what it says, doesn't mean you really understand what's going on and how to interpret it from an investor's perspective. Those are two different things. But so we're going to basically take what our model's net income is, what reported net income was, and we're going to try to sort of reconcile them, basically. I just want to glance at this. Oh, I see. They had a $4 billion one-time gain. So that's what we excluded. All right. So how did the business go from making, depending on whose definitions, if you use our definition, they made $4 billion in 2022. If you look at Intel's definition, they made $8 billion. But the actual cash they made, so that's the income statement, that's the reported net income. But the actual cash flow they made was $15 billion. So how do you reconcile that? And the same thing happened here, where there's almost no difference between Intel's and ours, and here where there's very little difference between Intel's and ours. They actually had a lot more cash flow. So how did that happen? Well, there's a lot of reasons there. This is a list of all the adjustments. The biggest adjustment is depreciation, which is a non-cash expense, right? When something depreciates, you don't actually lose money. You sort of lose accounting value. And that's the biggest difference. But we also have CapEx, which is a cash expense, but it's not run through the income statement. CapEx is when you buy a good and you capitalize it, and then you depreciate it. So that's kind of a lot of what's going on here, but let's keep looking. And theoretically, those two should kind of balance out. I mean, this is like a Bob Ross. I'm tempted to say something about little trees or something like that, but I don't know, what does he say? Happy little trees. It's happy little depreciation. And there's amortization. We are looking at Intel, yeah. EBITDA is a acronym that means earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. If I didn't name my cat Trashy, I was going to name her EBITDA. I know somebody who named their dog EBITDA. Amortization is like depreciation, just for intangible items. Alright, divestitures. Yeah, I saw Fetty Wap's in prison. Poor guy. Alright, and finally working capital changes. So if you add all these up, they actually equal to cash flow from operations, or probably better said, this is how you get cash flow from operations. Let's see if it sums up. Oh, didn't work. Let's see why. Might have messed something up. I see. 1 minus sign makes all the difference. Okay, there it is. All right, so it sounds good that they made $15 billion, but they also had CapEx, so we gotta remove the CapEx, and that's gonna change the picture pretty dramatically. Their CapEx for the year was 24 billion. So Intel lost money this year, or 2022, last year, I guess, which is a little frightening. Again, it was a rough year for semiconductors, but this is supposed to be like this capacity-constrained industry that's supposed to be making a fortune right now, and Intel is one of the only companies that has capacity, so I don't see why they're having such a rough time. You know, the recession's not here. It's not like the economy is contracting too much. So it makes me wonder how they're going to do it in an environment that's a lot worse, right? Like semiconductor companies are very cyclical, so they're very sensitive to economic conditions. And again, Intel's sort of investing for the future, but in cyclical industries, companies do this all the time. When there's a supply constraint and supply is really tight, they invest a ton in factories and equipment, and then guess what happens? The opposite happens, where everybody has a ton of supply and there's all these products and they can't move them. So it's a very cyclical industries are tough for that reason. You know, you have to really time, in the long run it's very hard to do, time the business cycle, which is as hard as it sounds, very, very difficult. So if you net these two out, you kind of get a concept called free cash flow. And you'll get 21 billion, 11 billion, and a loss of 9 billion. So how do you think about that? You know, the traditional rookie way of doing this stuff is like an earnings multiple, right? An earnings multiple is hey Geggy511, thanks for subscribing. An earnings multiple is kind of a poor man's way of doing a DCF. And how do you put an earnings multiple on earnings that are this volatile, right? If you look at like a company that has steady earnings, that's making 10 billion one year, 10 and a half, 11, etc., you can kind of put a multiple on it, but you can't put a multiple on this, right? Because you put 15 times earnings. Well, in 1 year the company's worth 300 billion. In another year it's worth 160 billion. Another year it's worth negative. So earnings multiples tend to fail when a company has volatile earnings. So one thing we could do is look at the average earnings, and some people call that CAPE's cyclically adjusted PE ratio. So you look at it over 3 years and you say, okay, they made 7.6 billion. Well, what's the PE ratio, or the EV to E ratio, which is probably more important? 16 times earnings. And you have to think about, well, is that reasonable or not? I don't know. But we also don't know if that's a fair way to look at it, because if this year is another negative year, let's say just a little smaller, now our average number is 4.5 billion. And 26 times is a lot different from 15 times, right? But if it's positive 10 billion, now we're really starting to look at something that could be like a cheap stock. So I really just don't know. And part of it is, if they're doing this free cash flow spend as this kind of big one-time, just like resizing of their footprint so they have more capacity, this would really be obscuring the earnings. And we also don't know why revenue dipped. We have to learn about the company, right? As much as the numbers tell the story of the company, we don't know every detail. We have to really understand the company. Even if these numbers looked really good, I would question it the other way and say, maybe this is a one-time gain that will reverse itself. So investing is really tricky because you have to be an expert in that industry. That's why you notice none of these files are filled out for hardware and semiconductors, because I don't really follow hardware and semiconductors. I find it fascinating, of course, but look at my biopharma sheet. Every model is filled out because I follow this sector much more closely. But for semiconductors, I don't, it's not my field, and to be able to keep on top of one field is hard enough, let alone 2 or 3 or 4. It's basically impossible. but I like learning new things, and I like helping you guys out, so I try my best to do that, but I also am not going to pretend I'm a semiconductor expert. I know a little bit. I used to work at some tech hedge funds, so I've gotten exposure to semiconductors over the years, but, you know, I'd be mistaken if I told you that, oh, you know, I can tell you everything about how fabs are designed and what it takes to you know, look at the back end and front end of semiconductors and the relationship between Intel and ASML and Applied Materials and, you know, who's a customer for who and who designs chips for who and all that stuff. I don't know. I can tell you all that stuff about in pharma. Isn't it interesting? Texas Instruments is also bigger than Intel now. Intel's really falling apart. Poor guys. It used to be the bellwether, old word people don't say anymore. The bellwether for the industry. The 10K probably be pretty fascinating to read in full. Let's read it briefly. We are an industry leader. Man, they were the industry leader by far. There was nobody even close. Have a positive effect on business, society, and the planet. It's always funny when these really big companies that used to be even bigger, they're still really focused on ESG because they still have that shadow of their former self. Nvidia doesn't talk like that. Nvidia's like, yeah, we're here to make money, man. Man, we don't care about ESG. Whereas the Intel thing is all about, you know, we're here to make a positive difference in the world. Intel's had a lot of management turnover. Five superpowers: compute, pervasive connectivity. Okay, I understand the first one. Pervasive connectivity sounds like the internet. Cloud to edge infrastructure, I guess. Cloud to edge infrastructure. I guess I understand what they're saying there. AI and sensing. Okay. Five superpowers. All right, so they have CCG. I think that's Client Computing Group. Decreased 23%. DCAI, I have no idea. I think it's data center. Decreased 15%. And NEX increased 11%. Results were impacted by an uncertain macro environment with slowing consumer demand, inflation, and interest rates. Level of uncertainty with our customers. It's interesting, you know, the GDP. I'm trying to see if there's a good relationship with GDP, and I should probably graph that. 20% discount's not enough. No ESG in my valuation. All right, CCG was down on lower notebook and desktop volume, while notebook and desktop ASPs were higher. DCI server volume decreased, led by enterprise customers tempering purchases, reduced inventories, and a softening data center market. I thought the data center market was the only market that was doing well for like cloud, but I guess, I don't know. Server ASPs decreased due to customer product mix. Next revenue increased primarily due to Ethernet ASPs and increased demand for 5G products. This is their NEX is like their networking business. I think it's probably the smallest business though. blaming everything: the war in Ukraine, COVID, supply chain. And we expect it to extend into 2023. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the product roadmap is one of the most important things in semiconductors, and it's often a little tricky, but I guess it's the 12th gen HX, or Intel Core HX, and semiconductor experts, okay, Alder Lake, they codename their processor sets. They have Sapphire Rapids, Raptor Lake, and Ponte Vecchio. There's an ASIC. I think they bought Altera years ago to get the ASIC business. X86 architecture. You gotta wonder when X86 dies, right? It's the 8086, and of course 386, 486. Maybe it'll never die. Here's the trailing 5 years. You can see quite a bit of cash flow. So it looks like 2022 is definitely a cyclical slowdown that hopefully represents the trough for them, but it may not, right? Yeah, the Apple is a serious competitor now in this stuff. Obviously, they don't make products for clients. Laptop GPUs and high-performance desktop GPUs, A7 series, Intel Arc. So this is their attempt to, I guess, get into Nvidia's business. A little late. Employees by gender. Well, they got a ways to go. What's URM? I don't know that acronym. Underrepresented minority. You guys URMs? Any URMs in here? Damn, they really have a way to go. Almost everybody at the company is not a URM. They're almost all male. That's more important than profit. I don't really care about their profit as long as their URMs are going up. Naked short selling is not a real thing, no. No, there's no unlimited money glitch. That'd be cool. But no such thing. I don't know why people are so in love with conspiracies. Just do your hard work. Surf and Billy, I totally agree. AMC, man, what a rotten company. AMC, GameStop, those kind of sorry companies. Apple M1 and M2. Yeah, I also want to, I probably have to make an AMD model to really get a sense for this as well. Here's CCG. Looks like CCG notebook, CCG desktop. Notebook, 18.8 billion. Desktop, 10.7 billion. So I guess it's still PC, very much a PC server heavy company, which makes sense, I guess. And then other. So that's 33 billion. 31.7, okay. That's half the company, roughly, is client computing, so that's not servers, that's just PCs for people. About half the business, CCG. And then I'm guessing servers are most of the second half. So here's data center and AI. Yeah, it's amazing to see their revenue go like this while Nvidia's goes like that. But I don't want to belabor the point about Intel having a rough decade. Network and edge. So this is like a relatively new business for Intel that's doing a little better than kind of a bright spot. That's really it. Oh, Mobileye is, I thought they spun this thing out. Do they still own most of it, maybe? Looks like they sold 6%. 6% of Mobileye. So it looks like they still own most of Mobileye. This is a bright spot as well. Pretty small though. Intel will be acquired? That'd be wild, right? I doubt it. I think the right management team will restore Intel to its prior glory, hopefully. It'd be sad if they got acquired. Wouldn't that be funny? Nvidia. Yeah, we're just buying Intel, whatever. Oh, accelerated compute systems and graphics. Whew. This is a new business unit? Cute. Intel Foundry? How many business units do they have? Oh, they can make a comeback. They just, like you said, need to really simplify their company. I'm not sure they need to have all this stuff. They may want to sell networking, for example. Really just focus on chips. I know it's like they want to be a little bit Nvidia, they want to be a little bit Taiwan Semi, they want to be a little bit AMD, like just be really good at one thing, I think. But I don't know. They thought they were really good at one thing and they lost their way. All right, well, we looked at a little bit of this stuff. I think I want to look at probably one more 10K and just like pop it in. And then we can kind of look more on the product side. You can see this stuff is fairly intensive. It's a little boring. If investing was exciting, more people would do it and make more money. You have to plow through huge amounts of information. It can be a bit tedious, but you get used to it. Who is this guy? Bob Swan. People really didn't like Bob Swan. Basically fired Mr. Swan. Ice Lake, 10 nanometer. They did sell the NAND flash business, so I have to be a little bit careful to make sure that we understand the delta there. Sometimes when a company acquires or whatever, disposes of another company, you got to be careful that you're not looking at, you're assuming that growth or shrinkage is organic or inorganic. Because obviously, you know, it can impact what it looks like the growth rate is. A lot of slow growth companies use acquisitions to kind of make their growth look higher than it normally is. Let's move these up a little. Okay, so here's what revenue growth for Intel looked like 2016 to 2022. I'm actually gonna look at GDP. See if I can get the GDP data. 2022 looked like basically close to flat, or according to the government at least. Trying to pull this up, it's not simple. Okay, so let's see. If we try to like superimpose GDP, see if there's anything we can kind of glean from that. So confused. Ah. That's all messed up. Hold on. No correlation whatsoever. I wonder if it's a leading indicator for GDP. Meta earnings tonight. I can't wait. It's going to be very exciting. can see the huge amount of buybacks Intel's done. They've gone from 5 billion shares outstanding to 4 billion shares outstanding. So pretty impressive. Once again, we'll look at the cash flow statement and get an understanding of what exactly is going on here. I'm just going to put in the CFFO at the bottom. You can see how a little bit of revenue change can result in a gigantic cash flow change. You basically go from profitable to unprofitable very quickly. Okay, so over the last 5 years, Intel free cash flow has averaged 11 billion, which makes the stock look quote unquote really cheap based on 11 times earnings, but I think they're saying that 2023 is not going to be a good year. So let's take a look at the recent comments. Fourth quarter revenue is down 32%. Wow. I'm guessing this is nanometers, so Intel 7 is the 7 nanometer process, is my guess. I wonder where we're going in terms of fabrication and wafer size. Can we go to less than 1 nanometer? I think there's a atom limit, right? I think the width of an atom is like 0.1 nanometers, isn't it? An angstrom. I know this from my chemical simulation world. Nine gigahertz, wow. Overclocked. And you guys do overclocking?